It didn't take more than 2 days before Tian came to face a major crisis. There was nothing to eat in the shrine. If he was by himself in a day, he'd only need just a couple of steamed buns with a small plate of pickled vegetables. Maybe he'd also pick some cucumbers from the fields to munch on, and he'd take care of himself perfectly. The offerings from the Puchi villagers were more than sufficient. Yet now there were 3 more mouths to feed in the shrine. 2 live humans and a half-dead ghost. It didn't take long before they cleaned him out of his rations. At the very least, the 2 children were all right. But Chirong, the half-dead ghost, possessing a full-grown man refusing to come out, cursed Shilian out on one hand for feeding him shitty food, but ate more than anyone else on the other. Shilian really wanted to stuff a blackened pan into his mouth. After making sure the pan couldn't be easily pulled out, Shilian decided to take the 2 little ones out to walk around the markets to see if they could collect some junk, then find them a good meal. If it was said that Shilian's luck was usually bad, then Shilian today had especially bad luck. After walking around town, there was actually not a single scrap to be collected. Finally, he stood at a crowded intersection and made a decision. He would pick up his old line of work. Thus, he settled the 2 kids aside before he stood in the middle of the intersection and called out in a loud and clear voice. Dear folks and neighbors, today is the first time the servant has come to this treasured place. I will perform a few shameful tricks. They are embarrassing, but I hope that everyone will cut me some slack and give this poor man a hand, donate a bite to eat, or grant some coins for the road. Shilian had the air of a saint, the appearance of a cultivator, his sleeves clean and fluttering, his voice clear and sonorous, energetic and invigorating. Many on the streets who were idle soon came and surrounded him. What can you do? They said. Show us something neat. How about plate spinning? Shilian said cheerfully. The crowd waved their hands. That's not hard at all. It's child's play. What else can you do? Shilian then said, how about shattering boulders on my chest? The crowd complained. That's too old school, too old. Anything else? Only then did Shilian come to realize that even street performances need to keep up with the times. All of his best tricks were now nothing more than yesterday's news, and there was no one left who'd appreciate his craft. The crowd was going to break up, and without any other choice, he brought out his ultimate technique. He took out from his sleeves a set of protection charms that he made with his own hands and called out again. Free protection charms for watching the performance. They're handmade. Don't walk on by and miss out on this chance. Hearing that there were now freebies, the dispersed crowd soon came back. What kind of protection charms? They asked. Which temple blessed them? Is it the heavenly martial emperor? Do you have any for wealth? Asked another member of the crowd. Please give me a wealth charm. Thanks. I want one from Ju Yang. Please save one for me. No, Shilian explained. The one I'm giving away is from the Crown Prince of Shenle, blessed by Puchi Shrine. It is for sure effective. Of course it'd be effective. Other heavenly officials had at least thousands of people praying to them daily. Their ears rang with white noise, and with even just a little too much work, they'd pass it down to the junior officials under them. As for Shilian, at most, he'd only have a few praying to him at once. So who was more likely to actually hear their prayers? The crowd scoffed. What the hell? We've never heard of him before. Shilian added, it's okay if you've never heard of him. Puchi Shrine is located just 7 miles out at Puchi Village. Everyone's welcome to pay a visit, and there's no need to bring offerings. Before he even finished, the crowd had already broken up. Every single one of the spectators littered the charms away soon after, and Shilin trotted over to pick them up, patting them clean before stuffing them back into his sleeves, not looking the least bit bothered. As he picked them up, a pair of cloth shoes stopped before him. Shilin looked up and saw Lang Ying's raven black eyes peeking out from under the bandages, watching him intently. "What's wrong?" Shilin asked gently. "Go over there and sit with Guzi. Just wait for me for a bit." Lang Ying was quiet. Just then, the two doors to a mansion at the end of the large street suddenly burst open, and a man was thrown out, angry shouts following behind him. The pedestrians on the streets immediately rushed over to watch the show. The thundering footsteps trampled by, and those protection charms that weren't yet picked up were instantly crushed, dirtied, and ripped up. Shilin watched speechlessly and gave up on saving them. He made Lang Ying go back to watch over Guzi, and then he himself went to check things out. As he approached the entrance to the mansion, a man looking to be a wealthy merchant was arguing with an old man who looked like a doctor. The wealthy merchant shouted, "What did you tell me when you came yesterday? Didn't you say that there was nothing to worry about? How do you explain today? My wife didn't fall or eat anything bad. So how did things become like this?" The doctor, however, cried injustice. "When I came to diagnose your wife yesterday, she was perfectly fine. I think, with regard to this, you need to find a cultivator, not a doctor." The wealthy merchant was outraged. He stood with a hand on his hip and the other pointing accusingly. "My son isn't lost yet. So why are you cursing him? You fake doctor. Watch yourself. I just might sue for all of your assets." The doctor picked up his medical case. "Even if you sue me, there's nothing to be done. I really can't read that pulse. I've never seen anything like it before in my life." The crowd jeered. "Find yourself a new doctor. Maybe go find a cultivator." Shilin instinctively felt that there was something off about this affair, and raised his hand in the sea of people. "Please look here. There's a cultivator here. I'm a cultivator," he said. Everyone turned to look at him, puzzled. "Weren't you a street performer?" they yelled. Shilin explained politely. "That was only a side gig. Thank you." He walked up to the merchant. "Will you bring me to see the esteemed madame?" he asked. Within the mansion came shrill screaming. No doubt, all the ladies in waiting were panicking. The new doctor, called by the wealthy merchant, wasn't going to arrive just yet, and men in desperate plight will do anything. So he really dragged Shilin through the door to see his wife, and Shilin also grabbed the doctor on the way in. When the men entered the bedchamber, there was blood all over the floor, and upon the large, flower-curtained bed lay a young woman. Her face was white as a sheet from severe pain. Her agony was so acute she'd likely be hugging her belly and rolling about, had the ladies in waiting not held her down. The moment Shilin walked through the door, he could feel all the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The chamber was heavy with the essence of evil, and that essence came from one place, the woman's belly. Shilin immediately blocked everyone behind him and shouted, "Don't move. There's something in her belly that's not right." The wealthy merchant was terrified. "Is my wife about to give birth?" he asked. The doctor and the older ladies in waiting couldn't stand for that ignorance and said, "It's only been 5 months. How can she give birth now?" That wealthy merchant raged at the doctor. "If she wasn't going to give birth, then you have no clue what's wrong. Then you're a quack. You can't even read a pulse." That woman was going to faint, and Shilin shouted again, "Everyone, be quiet." Then he flipped out Feng Xin. seeing that he suddenly unsheathed a long black weapon. Everyone jumped in surprise. "What are you planning?" they demanded. Then they saw Shilian drop his hand, and that sword actually floated in mid-air. Now everyone was astonished. Feng Xin hung from above, the tip of the blade facing down, pointing at the swollen belly of that woman. The killing aura of the sword was intense, and the crowd saw that the woman's belly suddenly moved. A lump of flesh raised up, jerking left, then right. It thrashed about until finally that woman hacked and coughed violently, a stream of black smoke emerging from her mouth. Feng Xin had been waiting, and that sword immediately struck the black smoke. The woman let out a long wail, saying, "My son," and instantly passed out on the spot. Shilian called back the sword and sheathed it anew on his back, then turned to the doctor. "It's fine now," he said. The doctor's eyes were wide, his mouth open, and Shilian waved in front of him a couple of times before he hesitantly approached. That wealthy merchant looked joyous. "Is my son safe?" he asked. However, after the doctor felt the woman's pulse, he said, his voice trembling with trepidation, "It's gone." The wealthy merchant was dumbfounded, and after a moment of shock, he roared, "Gone? How did she just miscarry?" Shilian, however, turned to face him. "The madame didn't miscarry. The baby is gone. Do you understand?" "What's the difference?" that wealthy merchant demanded. "It's quite different," Shilian said. "Miscarriage is miscarriage. Gone means this, that there was indeed a child in the madame's belly at first, but now that child has disappeared." Sure enough, the abdomen of that woman was swollen at first, but now there was no sign of external injury, yet it had shriveled down, looking exceedingly unnatural. The wealthy merchant was shocked. "Wasn't my son just there in her belly?" he shouted. "The one inside earlier wasn't your child," Shilian explained. "The one blowing up Madame's belly was that cloud of black smoke." After the doctor made sure that the woman was only passed out and that there weren't any life-threatening signs, they left the chamber. The wealthy merchant asked, "Sir Cultivator, how should I address you? Which temple did you come from? Which deity do you worship?" "No need for the sir, and the name is Xie," Shilian responded. At first he wanted to say that he was from Puchi Shrine, but when the words came to his lips, for some reason it turned into Chengdeng Temple. When those words left his lips, his face was oddly hot. That merchant said, "I've never heard of it before. It must be far?" Shilian didn't know how far it was, either. He answered softly, "Yes." After a few courtesy greetings, that wealthy merchant finally came to the point, his voice full of horror. "Dao Zhang, what was that monster earlier? Had my wife always nurtured that thing in her belly? That cloud of black smoke?" With the subject change, Shilian also turned serious. "It might not have always been that way. Didn't you say that when the doctor came yesterday, Madame was still perfectly fine? Her pulse was all right then, but messed up today. I'm afraid it was only last night that something happened to the baby. Please think, last night, did Madame do anything, or did anything strange happen?" "Nothing happened at all last night," the wealthy merchant said. "My wife never left the house. Ever since she paid her respects at the palace of Juyang and received this child, we built a small Juyang shrine at home, and she'd chant and burn incense without ever leaving the front or back doors. She is extremely devout." Shilian thought, if Feng Xin knew that someone worshipped him like this, then it'd really be a riot. After some thought, he asked, "Then did she have any strange dreams?" The wealthy merchant blinked and said, "Yes." Shilian was re-energized. And that wealthy merchant continued, Dao Zhang, you have such godly premonitions. My wife really did have a strange dream last night. She dreamt of a small child playing with her, calling her mum. Halfway through the dream, she felt something kicking in her belly. Then she woke up. Afterward, she came to me happily to tell me that the child in her belly couldn't wait to see Mum and Dad's faces, so the child came to greet her first. I was humoring her at the time too. In an instant, Shilin figured it out and said firmly, It's the child that's problematic. After a pause, he asked, Around how old was the child? What did it look like? Did Madame say anything? The wealthy merchant was covered in cold sweat from shock. I'm afraid she won't remember. At the time, she already told me she wasn't sure how old the child was, only that it was fairly young, begging her to hold it, and when she held it, it was light. Shilin hummed and said, I'm going to ask a few more questions. Please answer them honestly. Otherwise, I won't be able to find the truth in all of this. First, are there any conflicts between wives fighting for favor? And second, had this Madame ever aborted a child? Asking about those conflicts between wives fighting over favors was to see whether this was a curse that came from mad jealousy. When women who had been locked in a deep harem got jealous, they could do anything. The second question about abortion was because if the child was aborted for questionable reasons, then there may be grudges left behind in the mother's belly, making the new baby suffer. Under Shilin's questioning, that wealthy merchant admitted to everything truthfully. Unbelievably, everything was spot on. Not only did he have a number of wives in his household, bickering non-stop every day, he also had a lover waiting for him to bring her in. Afterwards, the Madame's servant girl also reported that her mistress was originally only a mistress and had once been pregnant. She listened to the flawed diagnosis of street homeopaths that declared her baby a girl, and since she wanted a boy to strengthen her foothold, she aborted the child. After listening to this, Shilin could feel a headache coming on. The wealthy merchant was anxious. Dao Zhang, could this be the revenge of that unborn baby girl? That's a possibility, Shilin said, but not entirely. After all, Madame couldn't tell how old the child was in her dream, and whether it was a boy or a girl. Then Dao Zhang, that wealthy merchant asked, frightfully, since that cloud of black smoke only just filled my wife's belly last night, then where did my own son go?